until you decide to really wake up to your own accountability with your own health, because nobody's going to help you if you're not willing to help yourself. It's pretty simple. Go to whoever you want to. You can go get a million pins of acupuncture and take all these herbs and see the guru. But if the guru didn't tell you what your problem was, which was accountability, we have a problem.
Peter, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, mate.
Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure to have a chat with you.
Yeah, no, it's really good. And I like what you were just saying off air. Maybe we'll share some knowledge bombs with people. And but it's funny you say that, actually, because what we're talking about today is something that is kind of mysterious, I think, for a lot of people. Certainly for a lot of women here, talk about endometriosis or even just hormones in general. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there or lack of understanding as to the influence that hormones play on the body and what they actually are. And so I'm excited to get into that with you.
Yeah. And I can't wait to talk about it, because it is there's a lot of things that I have a chat with many of my clients, which are predominantly female. I'd say, there's only literally a handful of men in my current client list, and the rest of the women. And they've all come to me because they haven't really found the answers to their hormones, or, there's a lot of misconceptions. So, period pain, PMS, is it normal? What's an acceptable level of pain? And, if it's affecting their quality of life, as it is when they come in to see me, what can we teach them? Because, as you know from our previous podcast, before I am along with being a practitioner, I should say, I'm an educator. That's my thing with people. If you're not learning why you're in your current situation and how to keep yourself out of that situation, then I'm not doing my job. That's just my personal opinion. So when it comes to women and their hormones, if you're doing things on a day-to-day basis, if you're eating things on a day-to-day basis, or you have a perceived thought of what health foods are, and they are different from person to person. So a classic example would be an excess consumption of histamines and a heavy blood flow, or exacerbation of endometriosis symptoms, for one, and re-educating them on what sort of foods they can tolerate, even if they are healthy, and what foods they should probably be reducing or omitting for a time period in order to achieve their goals.
Yeah, beautiful, man. This is going to be good. Let's get right into it then. Maybe start from a bit of an overview. I mean, women have different phases during their cycle. What are those phases typically? How can someone, be aware of them? And what are our hormones actually doing during those phases?
So it's actually quite complicated, but to simplify it so that people can understand, it's essentially broken down into 4 phases: the menstrual, the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, and the luteal phase. And another way of looking at it that's a lot easier for people to understand is your winter phase is your menstrual phase, your follicular phase, which is, coming after the bleed up to ovulation, is known as your spring. And ovulation is known as summer. Wait, did I get those right? So is it winter, spring, summer?
Winter, autumn.
And then we go into autumn.
Spring. Yeah,
we go into autumn. So I do get them confused, but that's why I had to recite them again. And so I think if women understand their phases of their cycle in that form, it gives them a rough grasp on what they should be doing. So a classic case would be winter. Winter is, traditionally cold in most countries, except for, up here in the Gold Coast, it's not as cold, although Gold Coasters think it's cold. So I'm traditionally from Victoria, so I don't really feel it as much. But the point being, it's a time for hibernation. It's a time for respecting your body and slowing things down. And so traditionally in a lot of cultures, the time of bleeding was a time of regeneration and rest. But, shoot into the 21st century, where sort of, females are keeping up with men, which there's a great aspect to that, but there's also a physiological consequence, training at a high intensity, doing 12-hour shifts, all while you're menstruating, a time of vulnerability and weakness, a time of hibernation and self-care. There's a bit of a mismatch there. And then so from there, we go into the spring, and the spring is all about creativity. It's where estrogen predominates as a hormone. So a lot of people may have read about, say, something called estrogen dominance. And I think that a lot of people get trapped in these terminologies. But the follicular phase is dominated by estrogen, and teaching women how to wield that power is super important. So estrogen helps women become creative. It helps them get things done. It also allows them to eat more carbohydrates because they will be a little bit more sensitive to insulin, a hormone that allows the body to shuttle carbohydrates and glucose into cells for usage. Mm. And then we have the ovulatory phase, which, the magic happens in a lot of females, and part of it, yes, is for, procreation and reproduction. But the other part as well is that if you have a really good spring and then you have a really good summer, as far as you have a really good ovulation, then your autumn is going to be relatively cruisy because you're going to be creating a lot of a hormone called progesterone. And progesterone is about relaxation. It helps women soothe PMS. So optimizing progesterone is one of the most important things for females to do if you've got irritability, if you've got PMS, if you've got breast pain, if you've got PMDD, which is a more severe version of PMS. And then whether there is conception or not, then obviously a female will either be pregnant or they will head back into their winter phase. And understanding the different phases and what they mean and how to approach them can really help women maximize the different aspects of their cycle. And it's not discussed. I think that, if they taught the seasons, so even if we didn't talk about the follicular and the luteal, but we just broke it up into seasons, and we started teaching this in like year 7, where most females will start to get their period. So they develop this creative understanding towards their body, or body literacy. We would have 17, 18-year-olds probably thriving throughout their cycles completely differently, instead of being, completely, I don't want to say clueless, but just have a complete misunderstanding, or just to think that periods should be painful, irritability is absolutely normal, PMS is absolutely normal, and all these things are a pathology. They're a state of disease, and I am all about optimizing women and teaching them about their cycles. So I think this stuff beyond what I'm discussing should really be taught at a grassroots level. And I think that it should be placed at around year 7, year 8, if not grade 6 even.
Mm. Yeah, it's all about education. Everything to do with health is education, right?
Absolutely.
Learning about this stuff as early as possible. So then it becomes part of the conversation early on. I had Cam Fraser on the other day, and we were talking about men's sexuality. Like, where are those conversations? Yeah, they just don't exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Similar for women in this sense. Okay, so what are some other hormones at play during the seasons for women? And you talked a little earlier about foods that we can eat. So what are the sort of foods and things that we can be doing during these seasons to support a well-balanced cycle, as opposed to estrogen going through the roof and then plummeting and it being out of whack?
So we'll start with the winter phase. And so my preference, because you're in hibernation, very much like when we are in the winter in most sort of states, I prefer, easy to digest foods. So at that time, you're feeling very, very vulnerable. So a lot of people tend to go for comfort foods. So my preference is like slow cooked food. So if you're a meat eater, then going for slow cooked meats, especially like red meat, replenishing your iron stores. If you're vegetarian, vegan, then aiming for, like stir fries, really focusing on green leafy vegetables, again, going for your iron stores again. So making sure that things are nice and easy to digest as your body goes through a cleanse. The first 3 days of your period is a reset point for your body. So testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, FSH, LH, which is why one of the reasons in functional medicine, we often do what's called a day 3 test. So, a lot of females that see me who opt to do the testing will go through a day 3 test, and then on average a day 21 progesterone test, but we won't get into that. But the reason for the day 3 is because we get to get a snapshot into their baseline. And if we have FSH, LH, estrogen, and a couple of other hormones being too elevated when they're supposed to be at baseline, that's going to tell us if someone has a true estrogen dominance or estrogen excess or unopposed estrogen. And then obviously we're going to do testing. So, we need to really respect that ability to reset. And it's a mechanism that men don't have, that women have. So as soon as that lining sheds, it triggers a cascade of different functions. And one of them primarily is to bring hormones at baseline. And then we go into the follicular phase, which is the spring phase. And then you're going to start getting an increase in hormones, particularly estrogen. So when it comes to the follicular phase, which is the 2 weeks before ovulation in most females, it's not always the case. But if we're talking just simply in the form of follicular and spring phase, then you can eat more carbohydrates. You can run longer distances. You can be more creative. So to be able to fuel that, you're going to want to have more beans and lentils if your gut can tolerate it. You're going to want to have more starchy vegetables because you're going to be able to tolerate it without swelling. And then from there, we go into the ovulatory phase where females are most prone. It's the best time you're going to be able to execute for most women. If you're training a personal best, you're going to be able to run your fastest because we're going to get a peak in testosterone. We're going to get a peak in FSH and LH. And
what are FSH and LH?
So FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. So that stimulates the egg to start growing in the follicular phase. That's why it's called follicular phase. And so as the egg grows, it secretes estrogen. And as estrogen is secreted because the egg is growing, FSH tends to go down until we get about day 14 for argument's sake. And then you're going to get the LH surge, which helps the egg ovulate and rupture in preparation for conception. So there's a whole cascade of different complex things, and there's so many things that can go wrong. As an example, if people introduce estrogen clearing herbs, or there is studies to show that an excessive amount of fiber consumption can delay ovulation or stop ovulation. And this would be because it's binding to estrogen when your body goes through what's known as a feedback loop. As estrogen increases, FSH decreases. But if you're clearing out estrogen too far, the FSH won't decline as it's supposed to. And then you're going to get a mismatch. You're going to get a longer follicular phase. You can just miss ovulation altogether. And, this isn't really ideal, particularly for those women who are trying to conceive. It can really play around with their cycles. And that's just as simple as having too much fiber.
Mm.
So people that, as an example, to sort of clarify, people that are having, mounds of chia seed pudding, flaxseed, hemp seeds, and things like that, all that stuff is phenomenal. But my preference is to introduce that stuff post-ovulation at a time that you need to facilitate detoxification in the luteal phase. You want to be able to bind to any excess of estrogen so that you can avoid PMS, as an example, or try and avoid PMS.
Okay, so after ovulation, then we want to reduce estrogen.
You want to stabilize it, and you want to nourish progesterone. So things like vitamin E are essential, keeping your stress levels nice and, as stable as possible. And you do that, there's some of my favorites that I often suggest on Instagram are things like lemon balm tea, tulsi tea. There are herbs like ashwagandha that a lot of people use, really trying to reduce their cortisol levels so that you're teaching the body that it's the luteal phase. The luteal phase and its dominance in progesterone is all about stabilizing the lining of the uterus and allowing more blood vessels to go in there, because should there be conception or the seed attaching into the uterine wall, you're going to want to make sure that there's enough blood vessels and nutrients coming there. So it's a time to slow down. So after you've done your PB at the gym during your ovulatory phase, where you've done like a nice big 200 kilo deadlift and you're really happy, it's time to switch into more easy to digest food. So you might actually want to be I think women should be very mindful of the fact that one of the roles of progesterone is to slow down the transition of food through the stomach. And so the consequence of this for a lot of females is bloating during the luteal phase. Mm-hmm. So again, you might want to go from a raw food, based diet with carbohydrates in the follicular phase to in the luteal phase, like switching that up and being mindful again, to really find that sweet spot of fiber and, complex carbohydrates, which can be a little bit harder to break down because they'll be more prone to fermentation because you've got a slower transit time. Everything slows down so that your body can extract more nutrients for the potential growth of a baby.
So we want things that ferment slower. Is that what you're saying with the complex
Absolutely.
carbs?
Yeah. So again, not going too crazy on the fiber. And so I'll give you an example. So what I get a lot of my women to do instead is to make things easier to digest is that if you're going to have flaxseed, I'm going to get them to do ground flax seeds. If you're going to have chia seeds, I'll get them to do ground chia seeds, because when you're grinding these seeds, you're unlocking a lot of the essential fatty acids. You're still getting the fiber. And again, looking at that slower transit time, you're less likely to get bloated and maximize all the benefits coming from flax, chia, or hemp. You get all the nutrient density. You get the fiber content that's going to support any excessive estrogen and detoxification. So you get nice stools, because that's one of the most important things. If you're not pooing, we're going to have a problem. Yeah. So it's critical that those bowel motions move. It's one of the first questions that I ask people. We always have that poo conversation, and people get, because again, it's one of those topics that are really taboo. But for me, if you're going only once a week and we're trying to fix your hormones, instead of looking at your phase 1 detoxification, your phase 2 detoxification, all that sort of fancy stuff, my first question is, are you going to the bathroom? And they'll be like, yeah, of course I'm peeing. No, are you, having a bowel motion? Are you moving a stool? And what do they look like? Some people never even pay attention to their stools, which is actually quite incredible. I mean, they would do their business and then flush and they never see it. But again, these are all the things that I teach women. I'm like, you really have to pay attention to it. Number one, again, constipation is such a big problem in society, particularly with women. I'm sure men get it as well, but it's one of those things that I have to reteach people. And the most common answer I get from females is that, they'll go every 3 or 4 days, which I find really uncomfortable just hearing that. And they'll be like, yeah, but I've always been that way. Just like period pain. I've always been that way. And I'm sure people say that about headaches. Like, yeah, I get headaches all the time. I've always been that way. And I'm like, yeah, but these are symptoms. And then people are like, yeah, but I don't have, people, when it comes to the constipation, people will say, yeah, but I don't get any pain. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't get any anal pain. I'm not really like forcing it out and all this sort of stuff like that. But I'm like, yeah, but you're in my room with breast pain. You just haven't linked them. You're in my room with PMS, or you're in my room with severe acne. Of course you're going to get acne. You're not clearing out the most basic, not basic, but a fundamental right of humans is just to take a poo in the morning. It's just that simple. And one of the things that I'll tell people is that there's a natural reflex that happens when we get up in the morning. We get a spike of cortisol and adrenaline that wakes us up, known as the cortisol awakening response. When sunlight hits your eyes, it's a stimulus. It starts to stimulate dopamine, so we get stuff done. And part of that really cool process is that it makes you want to have a bowel motion, because when you stimulate things, just like with coffee, which is my other question to people, when you go poo, is it stimulated by a substance? Do you have coffee? Or better yet, I want you to skip a few days of coffee, as hard as it's going to be, and tell me if you still poo. Because if you're not, you've become reliant on the coffee. And there's nothing wrong with coffee, because I drink it and I love it. If anything, I'm a coffee snob because, I'm from Melbourne. So, but that's one of those fundamental things. And I think people, when they reach out to me, everyone's like, yeah, I want to do testing. I want to do this. I want to do that. I'm like, yeah, let's just talk about your bowels first. That's it. Let's talk about your caffeine intake. Let's talk about your sensitivity. And I'm running through all this stuff, in my consults, because they will impact. So for example, like I just learned from a colleague recently that in the luteal phase, so my colleague Olivia, who has, she's an incredibly knowledgeable like women's health coach in the PT realm and women's health in general. And so she had a really good post saying that a lot of women will have sensitivity to caffeine in their luteal phase, because their luteal phase causes them to detox caffeine faster, making it course through their system for longer periods. So the consequence is anxiety and irritability. So I didn't even know that. I love coming across information that I didn't know, because now women will come in and I'm going to tailor that. I'm going to put that piece of information into my consults to educate women. Are you getting anxious 1 week out from your period? Is it just purely hormonal as far as are we looking about, because if we have too much estrogen coursing through your system, one of the mechanisms is elevated histamine. So estrogen and histamine go hand in hand. So the more estrogen you have, the more histamine you're stimulating. The higher the histamine, the more the estrogen. So you get this vicious cycle. The consequence of that is that too much histamine in your system is going to lead to a heavier flow, because a female's uterus has an abundance of mast cells that respond to this and causes a blood thinning effect. So they're going to go through a lot more tampons and pads. So again, we have to help them clear their histamine and lower their estrogen levels. The other thing that happens as well is, like I said, the caffeine aspect of things. If it's not coming from excessive histamine, do we have to revisit their caffeine? And a lot of the time people fall under the radar is when they're drinking a lot of like English breakfast. They might not be drinking like, your black shots of, but there's so many clients that have the English breakfast times 5 a day with a dash of milk. And you're like, wow, like it's no wonder you've got shit sleep, and if you're clearing caffeine at a slower rate in your luteal phase, if you're a female that's prone to that, guess what? You're going to get horrible sleep during your luteal phase. 1 week out from your period, you're going to say, yeah, I become a bit of an insomniac. It's harder for me to switch off.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times when I'm talking to people about the different phases of their cycle and how to maximize it, instead of throwing supplements at people, instead of relying purely on, because I'm a trained acupuncturist, yes, I can settle the nervous system with acupuncture. Yes, I can help your detoxification work a lot better as far as getting your bowel motions happening, because it's not so uncommon that people see me and then their bowel motions start regulating. And that's a fantastic thing. But again, back to that thing that I love doing, which is about education. If I'm not talking to you about your English breakfast and you're still getting anxiety, we have a problem. Yeah, we've got to really address the elephant in the room. Are you pooping? Are you having too much teas that are caffeinated? It'd be black tea, it could be green tea. Like I said, green tea is really healthy. It's rich in antioxidants. It does so many different cool things. But green tea inhibits an enzyme called DAO. And DAO allows us to clear histamine. So if I'm not asking these questions and the person's like, oh, I don't drink coffee, I live a really healthy lifestyle, I really don't know why I'm chronically anxious and not sleeping. And it turns out that, they're having 3 or 4 cups of green tea a day for weight loss or antioxidant, or that's just, they used to drink a lot of black coffee and now they've switched to green tea, which in their mind is like, yeah, that's a healthier option. Of course it is. Absolutely it is. But look at your presentation. And then you reduce or you cut out the green tea, because it's generally a lot easier to cut out without all the headaches that accompany from cutting out black coffee. And lo and behold, their symptoms start getting better.
Man, and the flow-on effects of all these things, right? Like you said, we're having caffeine in the luteal phase. So there's anxiety, there's bad sleep. So then it gets to the point where we're bleeding and it's like we're just frustrated with everyone because we haven't been getting enough sleep. So then it just continues on this cycle. Oh, I've got my period. I'm a bit grumpy, and it's like it's actually got nothing to do with bleeding.
Oh, absolutely. And people also blame it on the hormones.
Yeah, exactly. My hormones are out of whack or whatever. And it's like, well, actually, it's all of these factors within your lifestyle that are leading you to that point. It's not the actual process of bleeding in that moment or your hormones. It's
absolutely not
everything else that we're plugging into our body that's getting us to being that point of irritable or grumpy or whatever it is,
Yeah, I had a case, recently where I had to like rehash this to someone, and when we dissected it together in the room, because this is what I help women do, is like, all right, cool, we're gonna dissect your food, we're gonna dissect your lifestyle, we're even gonna dissect your mindset and reframe how you think about hormones, where you're pointing the finger at your hormones being out of whack, but is that just the symptom of something else you're doing? So I had a case study where a client's like, I'm getting really bad sleep. I'm getting, breakouts. I'm getting constipated. I'm getting bloated. I'm like, cool. So tell me how you wake up. She's like, all right, cool. So I get people to run me through their day. And she's like, I wake up. What time do you wake up? Because it's all about circadian rhythms as well. If you're waking up at 6 a.m. and then 8 a.m. and then 9 a.m., we're going to have a problem. And she was waking up, and within, probably the first 10 to 20 minutes, like many people, she was having a shot of black coffee. And from there, coffee obviously gets broken down. And then I'm like, sorry, cool. So when's your next coffee? She's like, probably between, 11 and 12 because I get really tired. I was like, okay, cool. And then she's like, yeah. And then I'm having another cheeky one around 2, 3. And I'm like, okay. So, and she's like, I'm not going to lie. They can be doubles. So I'm like, you can have, 3 doubles. And then the next question was like, how much water are you having? Water? I don't know, 500 mils. So I'm like, so let's go back to the bowels. Yes, coffee is a stimulant, but it's also very dehydrating. And you can become desensitized to the stimulus of caffeine. So in the beginning phases, when you have caffeine, it stimulates you and you have a bowel motion until you get to the point where you start becoming resistant to its stimulus. The cortisol comes out, adrenaline comes out, but your cells and your brain are no longer responsive. So what happens? We need more of it. We go from a single to a double. And then the 11 and 12. So one of the mechanisms that happens with caffeine. So when people are on caffeine, I say, look, we're gonna try to get more longevity out of your caffeine instead of just being mean and saying, cut it out. And so when you wait, one of the molecules that makes us sleepy is something known as adenosine, and adenosine helps make us sleepy. And in the morning, for a lot of people, when they're getting that haze, they're getting that grogginess, your adenosine hasn't been cleared properly. So you need to actually continue to, get moving in the day, get sunlight, get some easy, go into a fasted state or whatever you need to give your body a break and let your body to continue to get rid of the adenosine. Once it's cleared, about an hour to 2 hours after waking up, you can have caffeine and you're less likely to have the craving around 1, 2 because you've cleared your adenosine. But if you wake up and one of the first rituals or habits that you do is have like a really strong coffee, then you don't clear out that adenosine. Eventually, the adenosine of, let's just say, Sunday will build up onto Monday. You call yourself, you're having Monday-itis as an example that many people say. And so you have that early caffeine and you've got the adenosine from Sunday building into the Monday. By the time 11 or 12 o'clock rolls around and the caffeine is detoxified, you're going to get all this adenosine, which is it's a molecule that makes us tired. It's going to hit you in like a ton of bricks. Yeah. So naturally you're going to want a double shot and you feed that cycle and you end up with a third coffee, or you end up with terrible sleep because then you have that late coffee between 1 and 3 or even 4 p.m. for some people, and not everyone can clear out caffeine. And what happens at nighttime is that they're like, I just can't switch off. It's like, well, of course you can't. Look how much caffeine you've now, got coursing through your system. And then on Tuesday, you repeat that same cycle because on Tuesday, now you're tired because you're not getting into your deep and your REM sleep because you're overstimulated. And then you're not clearing adenosine properly. And you feed that cycle until one of 2 things happen. You become ill, you catch a cold or a flu. Because remember, a lot of the times when you catch a cold or the flu, that's your body trying to shut you down. It's that I've had enough. I now need to make you sick to shut you down. But as a society, we keep going. You know what I mean? We've got bills to pay. That's a whole different story.
Oh, man. I mean, this is the conversation right here. Anyone listening, this gets me so excited because this is the crux of it, man. The flow-on effects of all of these small choices that we make. And that was the perfect example there, talking about adenosine, which builds up as like this sleep pressure, right? And so then when it kicks back in after that second coffee, or when you need the second coffee because it kicks back in, it's worse, right? And then like you said, you just touched on briefly, then when we have the caffeine in our system, we can't go into deep sleep in the evening. And it's the deep sleep which helps remove the adenosine buildup that we've built up throughout the day. And so then we get up the next morning, we're groggy. We need to have a coffee because we're still half asleep because we've got all this adenosine that we've built up over weeks because we've been having a coffee every day or 2 coffees every day. We take it easy on the weekend because we just have one, right? And it gets me excited because it paints a really good picture as to every single thing that we do in our health, every single input that we put into the body and into the mind has an effect, whether that be something like coffee, like black coffee. And I know this because I used to be addicted and have experienced exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or whether it's the foods that we put in, it is all related whether we get that sunshine in the morning or in the afternoons. And we can talk about circadian rhythm a bit later. It's all connected and it all has an impact. And it may have an impact in the immediate, or it could be hours later, or it could be days later, or it could be weeks later. And we need to assess the foods we put in, how much water we're drinking. I mean, let's talk about stools for 5 minutes, Peter. I mean, like, this is one of the most critical bits of data that we can get from our body, right?
Yeah.
Every time we go and have a bowel movement, take a look at it. Like, what does it look like? What does it smell like? I actually caught myself the other day, like almost kneeling into the bowl because I was like, oh wow, that's fascinating. Like,
Yeah,
and that might be a bit extreme for people, but it is a really important piece of data to look at that, and understand what's happening. Has it exploded out, or is it like this sludge? Has it fallen to the bottom as opposed to sitting on the top of the water? What does it smell like? Does it look like anything that you've eaten? All these things tell us little bits of information about what the body's doing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because like you said, it's just another taboo conversation like periods or male sexuality, right? No one's talking about their poos.
Absolutely. And it's like, I've said, like, I think, I think doctors have their role, and the primary role of a lot of them is emergency medicine. Are you presenting with something that's life-threatening? And that's a fantastic thing. Yeah. Because if you have an infection, I'll give a classic case, like UTIs can escalate very quickly. So I see a lot of females, if they have chronic UTIs, they don't currently have one. And, then we can treat it usually with herbs. We're looking at sort of balancing out the bacteria of the vagina. So a lot of the UTIs, so 80-90% of UTIs often come from the E. coli bacteria. And so we're going to try and reduce that. We're going to try and improve the pH of the vagina. There's so many things we can do. But sometimes I've had this in the past where, females are like, yeah, it's really uncomfortable. They're in for an acute treatment. And I'm like, and it's already traveling to their back. They're getting back pain. That bacteria is traveling at a rapid pace. And so I'm like, look, in this case, we're going to try some herbal meds. We're going to try some treatment. Sometimes you get it, but I'm like, I'll give them a realistic time frame. If you're not better in the next couple of days, you're going to have to see a doctor, and you're going to have to stop the spread of the infections into the bladder and into the kidneys, where it gets really bad. And we can try and obviously work on your gut health afterwards. So there's a really good way of doing it, where we have like an integrative approach. Like, I'm not a cowboy and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to, take this away right now, because there's always going to be variables, and, my patient's safety is number one. Mm-hmm. So, with doctors, it's about emergency medicine. What doctors don't practice is optimization medicine. Yeah, such a word doesn't even exist. So of course they normalize, period pain. Of course they normalize, heavy flow. And if you don't come, if they do the testing that's required, so I'll give you an example, like, endometriosis, we know is such a vicious condition. We don't understand why it happens yet, but we do know that its prevalence is increasing. We know 1 in 10 females have endometriosis, and it used to be anywhere from 8 to 10 years, depending on when you read, on average, to get an endometriosis diagnosis. And it can only really be diagnosed through a laparoscopy, which is an invasive type of surgery. Anything else doesn't really cut the mustard as far as diagnostics. And so many females, because of the belief of society and period pain, and it's a normal thing, will go to a doctor and say, I've got period pain. They'll take, all sorts of medication, and they're just like, yeah, well, you've got period pain. You're a female. That's just how it works. But again, if we go back into, all right, what's your caffeine intake like? How are you detoxifying? Are you having a bowel motion? Are you having things that are high in histamine? Are you inflamed? Do you have IBS associated symptoms, because they go hand in hand with endometriosis? Do you have a permeable gut, otherwise known as leaky gut? There are so many facets to endometriosis that if we look at it only under the lens of a hormonal issue, we're missing the bigger picture.
Mm. So you're saying it's really the result of all these other areas coming together, like you
it's
said.
Bacterial, it's inflammatory, it's immune dysregulation, it's your sleep can be. So There are studies to show that night shift workers, females, are 50% more likely to be diagnosed with endometriosis because, as we were discussing before, sleep is queen to healing. Both REM, deep, and the other stages. You have to go through all the other stages to be able to heal fully. And, it quells the inflammatory response. Sleep is when we do all the cool things of healing. You go to the gym, you need to sleep to grow. As a female, to get really healthy hormones, you need to sleep to be able to heal. Even memory, the consolidation of short-term to long-term memory happens at nighttime. If your memory is fading, let's revisit your sleep. Yeah. So it's such a critical thing. So when I treat, as an example, nurses or shift workers that have endometriosis and have an official diagnosis, and I know they're doing shift work, it is often a longer process, primarily because they're not sleeping. Yeah. And their circadian rhythms are all over the place. The body doesn't even know where the hell you are in space and time. It doesn't have a sensitivity to sunlight versus LED light. It's just all over the place. Your brain and your body, so your hypothalamus, your pituitary, and your adrenal, thyroid, ovarian axis is completely obliterated. It's gone.
Anyone listening who is a night shift worker, I beg, please, if there's any way to stop doing that work, please do it because it's so detrimental to the health, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I mean, it's classed as a carcinogen, but people, I mean, we need nurses to do, the night shift workers, because obviously people get admitted to emergency medicine. So, so for me, it's like, all right, cool. How do we mitigate as much of the brunt of the work you're doing? Let's revisit your stress factors. And this is one of the things when it comes to treating endometriosis, is that we're looking at your gut health and the bacterial link. We're looking at something called LPS, which is a is a byproduct of, endotoxins in the stomach, which can create a lot of immune dysregulation and an inflammatory process. We talk about things like, unfortunately, there is a strong link. It's not a causal factor, but there is a strong link between endometriosis and childhood trauma. Yeah. So we're looking at that stress response. What was happening in that moment in time? Oh, absolutely. And it's not for everyone. So I will always ask that question to females, because when a female's body is trying to establish a complete connection between the brain and the ovaries and the uterus, it's a very sensitive time. And part of that is, trying to establish a connection. And then, anytime someone goes through an extreme amount of stress, it's going to change things. And unfortunately, when it comes to endometriosis, or, anyone who's got trauma like PTSD is a classic example, anything that triggers that sympathetic state efficiently is going to have an effect on that individual. So if that poor female is going through sexual abuse or any sort of abuse that is a contributing factor in the exacerbation of endometriosis, it has to be visited. And for me, I use that because I know how strong my tools are as an acupuncturist to settle the sympathetic nervous system, to help gut, function optimally, to help their bowels move. But at the same time, like I said, I'm a practitioner that likes to collaborate with other people. And I'll tell my client, I'm like, have you looked into the tapping method? Have you looked into cognitive behavioral therapy? Have you looked into art therapy? You've really got to gauge what works. Some people are very science-based. They want a psychologist. I've met people who've gone through endometriosis sufferers or other sort of trauma sufferers who have used art therapy. And when they tell me their story, they're like, I tried a psychologist, I tried, psychiatrist, I tried the medication as well. None of it really worked. And then I found my form of expression through painting. I painted my pain. So I was like, wow.
What does that look like?
I was like, yeah, for a lot of red. It was incredible to hear these stories. And it's something, as a practitioner, I've always got my, my eyes and ears, I'm seeing them and I'm listening to them. I'm like, cool. I've never heard of that. I never thought of that, I should say. And there's no reason why other women can't express their pain and their trauma through painting or creativity. And don't always need to be psychoanalyzed. I think there's a place for the Western aspect of psychiatry and psychology. But I'm sure many of the people listening to that have tried that and it's just not working for them. And then there's the creative field. You know what I mean? We're very lucky now that we're getting a rise in things like kinesiology, sound healing. There are other methods for people to heal, just like children. Some children are creative, some children are more logical, some are more visual, some are more auditory, some are more kinesthetic. And women, men as well, are no different. And as a practitioner, it's my job to try and pick that personality type out and say, this is how you're going to respond to my therapy, but I also think you will benefit from this.
Yeah, it's like left brain, right brain.
Oh, absolutely.
Logical and some not. That's fascinating. Painting pain. I need to go and draw some pain, see what that looks like. Sounds like a really internal and quite personal process, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever forget just like you, I was just like, wow, like my mind and you can totally see how it would work.
Yeah.
And, and hearing the experience and how it was cleansing, for that individual, I was just like I don't have no words. That's probably what the beauty of, creative painting is. You don't need words. You just use your hands and there was some sort of, sense of relief to whatever that individual had gone through. So I think it's really important to pay attention to each individual. So, talking about endometriosis again and not saying, yeah, it's hormonal. So go use the Mirena, go use the pill, which are the typical methods of treatment. And when it comes to endometriosis, Western medicine doesn't really have that much. There is no cure for endometriosis. You can put it into a type of remission depending on, which one of these exacerbating factors you decide to tackle for that individual. And, that's the type of, medicine that I practice is individualized medicine. I said before, is it immune? Is it inflammatory? Is it sleep? Is it stress? And so I always talk to females about what's called a sustaining factor. You know what I mean? So if you're doing all this amazing work during the weekday, but you go get wasted on the weekend with your friends, and we know alcohol is a really big exacerbator of endometriosis because of its inflammatory response, the way that it puts a toll on your detox pathways. So your estrogen increases, the way it just punishes your gut lining. So so you become more prone to reacting to foods. The fact that it creates dysbiosis. You can actually Google alcohol and dysbiosis, meaning that you get a excessive flourishing of negative bacteria. They all create endo flares. So we're doing amazing work from Monday to Friday, and come Friday night and Saturday, there are some people that will still go out there and get wasted. It's just like, well, okay, cool. So let's take it back a bit. And so the question I'll actually ask these particular clients, because they tend to be in their early 20s, is, and it's fine because it's not my place to judge you. And my question to them is, are you ready to heal wholeheartedly, spiritually, physically, emotionally? And if you're not, that's okay. You know what I mean? It's not my job. And I think that's the thing. Like on the reverse side, I hear stories of females that don't want to take the pill. They don't want to go on the Mirena, and the doctor will shame them. They'll be like, well, if you don't go on the Mirena or take the pill, you're an idiot. You know what I mean? They will guilt them. But with me, it's the same thing. I will actually ask them, are you ready for this journey? Yeah, because that's exactly what it is. It's not an overnight endometriosis remission. It's not always going to be a linear path to healing. There's going to be ebbs and flows like most complex conditions. And if you're ready, I'm here. And if you're not ready, that's also okay. I'll meet you on the other side when you are ready.
Yeah, Peter, I think that is the question to ask anyone who wants to heal.
Oh, absolutely. You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people say no.
Right. And it's like, cool, I'll see you when you're ready.
Exactly. And there's no harm.
Yeah. I think being really open with ourselves about that. Like, am I actually ready for this to be out of my life, to have moved on from this? And being okay if the answer that comes up is, no, I'm not actually ready. I really like that. Endometriosis then. So you mentioned dealing with some younger women. I had a question around that. Like, can you actually have fully fledged endo at an early stage in life, or is it typically in 30s and 40s and 50s that it starts to become more, I guess, severe?
It's a good question, actually. I think it really is case by case. So endometriosis, the most common present, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around endometriosis. So one of the misconceptions is that, so you get endometrio-like cells that grow in other places of your body. So you get these cells that are, that look like the endometrium, but isn't the endometrium. And that was one of the cool recent discoveries, where it's not actually your endometrium spreading; it's endometrium-like cells spreading to colon, to stomach tissue. And the point raising is that there are different levels. So when a female has a laparoscopy, you've got stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. And that often tells a female how much scarring and adhesions they have. Now, the reason that I mention this is that we don't know until you have a laparoscopy. There are some people that do an ultrasound, and then the doctor will say, yeah, you really need to look, we've seen something. You need to do a laparoscopy. But the stages do not correlate to pain. So if you're a stage 4, it does not mean that you're going to be in agony every period. You're going to have all the typical symptoms associated with endometriosis. And stage 1 doesn't, because it's a lesser spread of the lesions and adhesions, it doesn't mean that you're going to be less in pain. So until we really do the laparoscopy, we actually don't know the level. Now, one thing that does really piss me off is I think a lot of doctors look at the stages of endometriosis and the potential severity and use that as a, and I've seen this so many times clinically, they use that as a scare tactic for women, because one of the misconceptions is if you get pregnant, you won't have endometriosis after. Like, you'll be fine. You know what I mean? And the other scare tactic is because you're young and you have stage 4, you've got, you've pretty much got adhesions and all sort of jazz. Like, it's just spread all over you. So the term they'll use sometimes is that you look all cobwebbed inside, and it does look like that. It can look like that. It'd be like, yeah, you can't have kids. So you're in your 20s. It's very unlikely that you're going to have kids without assistance. And so if you choose to have kids in your 30s, the likelihood with having kids without the help of IVF is quite minimal. And I call bullshit, because as a clinician, I've seen some of the most terrible endometriosis, and I've been lucky enough to be able to help these women get pregnant because they're ready for the method. And the method is the emotional side, the sleep side, the lifestyle side, talking about their alcohol and caffeine consumption. We're going through a whole gamut of different things to get them to where they need to be. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that every female that is with me gets pregnant. That's just ridiculous. I'm not Jesus, and I don't pretend to be Jesus. But back to your question of, does it get worse? It really depends on how they treat their body. So if they have inflammation from excessive wheat consumption, excessive, inflammatory foods, if they have the high histamine, if they have that history of trauma and they're doing a 9-to-5 job that they absolutely hate, chances are it's probably going to be worse, because you're fueling the fire. That's what you're doing. And if you choose to bury your head in the sand until you're in your 30s, you are the sum product of everything you've done every single year before that year.
Spot on, brother. Yeah.
So, and that's because that's, people come into the clinic and, the first question that people ask, why me? Well, let's have a look. Let's have a chat. Let's go down the rabbit hole of your health. For me, it goes so deep as far as like, do you have any idea what your mom's preconception was? Was it easy? Was it hard? How old was she? Okay. Did she drink or smoke? Depending on the person's age, because, back in the day, they used to do that. And then we go into, how was their pregnancy? Was there any trauma involved? Do you know what I mean? Because if, a baby is going to feel the adrenaline and cortisol from a mum's trauma during birth. During gestation, as in during pregnancy. And then we have birth trauma. Do you know what I mean? That were you cesarean? Were you natural? Going through the vaginal canal is going to make your gut bacteria flourish, because that's your first inoculation. And then if your answer to that was, no, I was a cesarean, were you breastfed, or do you have a history of antibiotics? Which we also know has a strong association with endometriosis as well, because of the shift in bacteria or the lack of beneficial bacteria. Yeah. So then, that's just the primer. That's like, cool, this is the things that you can't control. But what you can control is, what was the average diet like in your household? Because again, even myself, like, every parent does their best with what they know. Most people don't maliciously go out there to give you shit food on purpose. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, well, I mean, I'm sure some parents are, blissfully ignorant, but most parents always do their best. So did you grow up on white bread? As an example, did you grow up on a lot of pasta? Did you have a lot of sugar? Was this was it a staple? Was mom and dad really exhausted on a Friday? So every Friday was pizza night. You know what I mean? So you go into a state of insulin resistance, or even if you didn't put on the weight, where you over consuming refined sugars, which, a lot of people then go into and this is, how was your immune system growing up? Did you have glandular fever? Were you always sick? And when you ask these questions, a lot of the females that I work with will be like, oh my God, you have described me to a T. So I'm like, now they're in their late 20s, early 30s. And I will say to them, can you start to see the picture I'm painting? Yeah. Everybody has a threshold. Every person's vessel. Yeah. Your body is a Lamborghini. Treat it like a fucking Lamborghini. Yeah. Make sure you service that car, which nobody does with their body until they learn that it's, sort of too late. Make sure you, wash it frequently, hopefully. Take care of the interior and the exterior. And most of all, the most important aspect to the Lamborghini analogy is take care of the person who's driving the car, because that's your mindset. That's how you drive your car. Yeah, you wouldn't be fucking shitting on a Lamborghini. And like I said, a lot of people are blissfully ignorant until they're ready to make that leap of faith, and they're ready to work with, practitioners to get down to their root cause. And so once I've painted that picture for a lot of females, they're like, wow, I didn't know it was that deep. I did, like, as in my health history goes that far, and the impact. And so we go back to, you are the sum. You right now, the person you are in front of me is the sum of everything that we've just discussed. This is a year by year where you're not shitting every day. You're having, recreational drugs. You're having alcohol. So you're putting a great toll on your antioxidant potential. And this is the outcome. For some people, it's autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid. It could be psoriatic arthritis. For some people, it's chronic fatigue, it's fibromyalgia. And that's the thing. It's just that until you decide to really wake up to your own accountability with your own health, because nobody's going to help you if you're not willing to help yourself. It's pretty simple. Go to whoever you want to. You can go get a million pins of acupuncture and take all these herbs and see the guru. But if the guru didn't tell you what your problem was, which was accountability, we have a problem.
I just wanted to marinate on that for a moment there. Wise words. We got to own our shit, man. Quite literally. We got to look at our shit, but our own mental stuff. Super, super powerful. I like the Lamborghini analogy. For me, it'd be a Ferrari over a Lambo, but yeah, I mean, we just need to replay that. I'm going to be listening back to that. That's what it's all about. And what I love is we are the sum of how we've spent every single day. It's the things that we do every single day for the previous however many years you've been on the planet up until this day. Your physical and emotional and spiritual body is the expression of that. Absolutely. And so if you want something to change, you need to change what you've been doing every single day to help facilitate that. Because if you keep doing the same things, nothing's going to change.
Absolutely. And it's which is the other question I'll ask a lot of my clients, which it really sounds like quite silly as a question, but when I explain it to them, I'm like, do you believe you can get better? Because you're so busy with the diagnosis, people become their diagnosis. They become their endo. But that's what I'll say to them, like, Jenny, you are not endo, you are Jenny. If Jenny believes that she can heal, I'm here to facilitate that healing through nutrition, functional medicine, acupuncture, Chinese herbal medicine. But you have to believe you can get better. Or you are your diagnosis because of what your doctor told you, and it's game over as far as the mindset, because what the mind believes is what comes into existence. That's not an airy-fairy thing. Like I like to teach people about the work of Joe Dispenza.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just breaking the habit of being yourself. And this is part of the complexity of any chronic pain disorder or any complex disorder. The person's brain has actually changed because they've been suffering for such a long time. Often people will go to other practitioners that are natural. Like I've been to a naturopath, I've done that and it's failed me. And I'm like, did they treat the person or did they treat the diagnosis? There's a big difference. Yeah. And people are like, what are you talking about? Well, did they hear your story, Jenny? Most recently, I had a client beautiful client, and there was a lot of thyroid, adrenal sort of components to it, and she's seen a lot of integrative GPs, and she's seen so many different people, and I just remember saying to her, tell me your story. I don't mean tell me about your disease, but tell me about what's hurting you. Tell me about what's making you tick and not tick. What keeps you motivated? What doesn't keep you motivated? Because if we can't figure that out, we're in trouble. You won't take the herbs that I give you. What is your purpose for getting better? What is the why behind feeling better? Because if you think that it's just, I want to feel good, like I just want to have more energy, it's not compelling enough. But if you say, I want more energy to play with my child on the playground, we elicit emotion. It's completely different. And asking those really important questions with people will change their therapy. And people are like, I never thought of it that way, because people were treating the disease, not the person.
Yep. Which is just a symptom of how we've been brought up, as to think, well, I've got this problem. I got arthritis, so I need to treat the arthritis, as opposed to I need to adjust the way I've been living, which will change how my body expresses the problems that it has.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. And this is where, we go back to that trauma therapy. And I'm not saying that I'm a psychologist or a psychotherapist or, any of these things, but those really important, deep questions can set people free. And sometimes people just need to speak verbal diarrhea. And as practitioners, we just need to sit there and breathe with them. You know what I mean? Because their breath changes as they start telling a stressful story. And so as a practitioner, if you control your breathing and you try and mimic their breathing, you can transform their breathing in that moment in time subconsciously, because they'll start mirroring you. And so you've changed their breathing. And we've discussed this before. Breath is a foundational aspect to humans. Are you getting enough carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange? You know what I mean? Are you breathing through your nose? Or are you a mouth breather? Because simple things like that are going to change the parasympathetic, the sympathetic. It's going to change the way you heal. It's going to change the way. And again, so when we're talking about, treatments towards endometriosis, and people are talking about stress and anxiety, I'm like, cool, let's just practice some breathing. Well, this is the breath work that you can do, like box breathing. There are different types of, count methods. And I'll tell you, sometimes people are like, oh, Pete, I'm so bloody anxious, beyond the needles and the herbs, and what else can I do at home? Cool. What I want you to do, switch off your phone for like 15 minutes, put it on airplane mode, and kick your feet up against the wall. Yeah, that's simple. So just on the ground in an L shape, like you're stretching your hamstrings, and do that for at least 10 to 15 minutes. Maybe put some, delta waves or, some binaural beats that helps the calming factor of the brain a little bit faster. But the simple benefit is put your hand on your belly and breathe only through your nose. Slow things down for 10, 15 minutes. And when you do that, part of the mechanism is when your feet are up, the blood is going to pull into your heart, and your heart is going to receive that message of the blood flowing easily to the heart, and it's going to slow down naturally. It's a fast way of slowing down that heart rate. Simple. You don't need to take a pill. You just need a little bit of time. Yeah, we don't always have to pop a pill. And when you give people those techniques, again, it's like, cool, because if I help you do these little hacks, you're going to feel more motivated because you're going to be less anxious, and you're going to be more willing because you're going to be in that parasympathetic state. You're going to be more in that rest and digest phase. And so we can progress forward, and I can help support you more. Simple hacks can go a long way. We don't always have to pop a pill.
Little wins.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if I'm suffering from endo symptoms, or just generally my period is always an uncomfortable experience.
Yeah.
I'm talking on behalf of the greater consciousness here.
I'm just picturing you with long hair. Sure.
Like what we've kind of touched on it already. I can look at my sleep, minimize stress, take some deep breaths. What are some other typical places, and is it as simple as there's some good kind of foods that I can move towards eating more of, or is that on a case by case basis for you based on what they're?
I think it's I think when it comes to endo, it is very much a case by case basis. But the first thing that I tell females is number one, mindful eating. Yeah, that's that above all. Like if I'm giving you like the recipe for a really good smoothie and you're scoffing it down because you're too busy, then I've already lost, because you're not going to get all the nutrients from that. So mindful eating is sitting down, it's breathing, it's looking at your food. Sometimes people take it to the level of giving thanks for their food and then, chewing your food. Yeah, because when you chew your food, it's going to be broken down into the finer molecules that we need. It starts the digestive process with the enzymes in your saliva. It makes it easier for your stomach acid to then break down the proteins and into smaller molecules. Then the small intestine, we get further extraction with all sorts of different things. But if you skip all those steps, then we're going to be in trouble. So mindful eating is the first one, and making things easy to digest. So for example, we go back to the flaxseed and the chia seeds, which are rich in nutrients. I'll get them to have ground. Yeah. Make sure the seeds aren't shooting through into your stool all the time. Yeah. Make sure you're extracting everything instead of finding food particles in your stool, because we're not going to get the benefits or maximal benefits like we want. And the other thing as well is I'm a big, fan of, like your bone broths, having filtered water, the simple stuff, filtered water. And sometimes you've got to mineralize it with things like colloidal minerals, or you can put like a pinch of salt. That's going to help your adrenal function. It's going to help your energy function. If you're using, like your Celtic salts, you're going to get 60 plus minerals in there. So it's going to stop you from peeing exponentially. But it's the most common complaint, because if you're hydrated, that's going to help your detox pathways. It's going to help your stools. And from there, once they've got the foundational stuff, we help upgrade into a specific dietary plan for them. And a lot of the times it's like, look, minimize your weight, because it is I don't like to be too crazy with people in the sense like, oh, cut out wheat, cut out dairy, whatever. It is a case by case. A lot of females with endometriosis can tolerate dairy unless you're all out, lactose intolerant. However, if you have a complexity of endometriosis and polycystic ovarian syndrome, you may not want to have dairy, even if you're not lactose intolerant, because milk has such an insulinogenic response, which is not a good thing for PCOS sufferers. So that's what I'm saying. Often endo rears its head with other diseases or common female problems. And then from there, it depends, we've got vegans, we've got vegetarians, we've got, all sorts of different things. So, in today's world, it is getting a little bit harder to navigate because people do have custom diets and intolerances. So, the foundational stuff for me is make it easy to break down, be mindful of what you're eating, and make sure you're well hydrated.
Love that. And focus on your sleep.
Be
aware of the caffeine.
There's absolutely all those things are definitely like foundational. And you know what? The simplest things work the best.
Yeah.
Because it's sustainable. Whether you see me or not, I know you're going to be able to sustain this, and you're not be scratching your head saying, I'm going to take this pill at this time. I'm going to take this pill at this time. Like, hey, I'm just going to hydrate. Just buy yourself a glass 1 liter bottle and set a timer as an example, and aim for like, between 2 to 3 liters.
Yeah. It's the fundamentals, baby.
Absolutely.
Get the water in, eat the right foods, get some sunshine, move the body, get some good sleep, minimize stress.
You pretty much summed up what everyone should be doing.
And make sure you're doing things that you enjoy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a whole like separate, sort of podcast. And it's something that I do talk to a lot of females about, because, even when it comes to marital stuff, a lot of females will come and they'll vent to me. I'm in a very privileged position for females to disclose so much information for me. And for me, it's like, cool, how do we navigate around that? It's not my place to tell you to leave your husband or to leave your partner, but it has to be factored in to your healing journey. You know what I mean? I'll ask the person, how can I facilitate this? Would you like me to send you to a counselor? Would you like to do couples counseling? Because if you hate, if you're constantly triggered by the person that you live with on a day-to-day basis, we're not talking about like the odd bickering. We're talking about, it's a day-to-day anxiety, fighting, and it's just really not conducive to your healing journey. Because if you're stressed out constantly, you're going to suppress your stomach acids. So even if I give you the method of like eating good food, the very specific supplementation, you can't even do the most basic thing, which is to break them down with your stomach acids, because you're chronically stressed, because that is part of the mechanism. When you're stressed, your body doesn't give a shit about digesting things. It needs to survive. Yeah. This is why if you eat when you're angry, you're probably likely to get bloated. Yeah. Goes in there, stomach acid suppression, boom, or you lose your appetite. Yeah. People that have an argument, unfortunately, at the dining table, what happens? You lose your appetite. People say all the time, oh, I lost my appetite. Yeah. And all that, it's all psychological and it has to be dealt with. And you have to bring that up with clients.
The conversation at the dinner table is so important, right? Let's not talk about COVID at the dinner table, please. Absolutely. I don't want to hear about it. I don't mind, let's get out of it. Let's shift into some gratitude, share something we're grateful for over the dinner table, go around the dinner table, look at our food and just look at it for a minute. Think about it. Wow. Look at this potato. Isn't that amazing? How did that even grow out of the earth? Look at this. I'm eating a lot of fruit at the moment. Look at this rock melon. How did this get created off the vine? And it's just this beautiful meal and orange and let's connect in with the food. So it allows our body to get out of that stressful state, like you said, so we can digest and assimilate our food well. Man, we've covered some good stuff. I love talking fundamentals, man. It's nice. So what else? Are there any other important pieces to the puzzle when we talk about endo, Peter, that you come across or that you feel need to be shared or discussed?
I think the most important thing is like, don't pigeonhole yourself into the concept that it's all hormonal. Like I said before, everyone is different, and not everyone, even though I think the study with regards to the trauma, I don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure it was a 70 to 80% of females with endometriosis had some history of trauma. There are definitely females that don't have trauma. There are females that don't drink. There are females that don't have coffee and, they have really severe debilitating endometriosis. And so, I think my thing is to be wary of the things that you Google and don't self-prescribe. So a classic case would be, endometriosis is a estrogen dominant, disease. And it's like, kind of. And that's, when we look at Western medicine, looking at, using the pill of the marina, it's the suppressive effect. It's based on the fact that using these hormones supposedly stop the growth or the progression of endometriosis, progressing so fast. And, obviously, as a clinician, I see this to be completely untrue. I see females actually get worse. I've seen females get worse with a laparoscopy, and it is case by case. And so I guess my tip is be careful what you're Googling and be careful not to self-prescribe. And this includes natural medicine, because it's so easy to access so many supplements that you would see. You go to one website, endometriosis, it'll be like, take DIM, increase your broccoli for estrogen detoxification, maybe, add some antimicrobials in there for the LPS, the bacteria known as like berberine, oregano oil. You can end up in a very hot mess. Yeah, you can cause harm with natural medicine. And I've seen it happen before. And the other thing is, if you feel like you're not being heard, find another doctor. That means a traditional general practitioner. Sometimes that can mean a naturopath or even an acupuncturist. If you feel like you're not being heard and you're being ignored, or you're just doing a protocol and you don't feel like an individual in that room, find another doctor. Yeah. There's no harm in finding someone else. Happens, like I said, I personally help a lot of people, but I'm sure there's people that I, had to find someone else with me, and that's absolutely fine. We're never going to have, and that's what makes us hungry as practitioners. Well, me anyway. Do you know what I mean? I'm forever the student. And it's just like, cool, if I couldn't help you, I'm going to try and find out why. Was it a personality thing? Was it a missing piece of, knowledge that I didn't have? And then I'll be honest with that person. That's why I said, that's why I like collaborating with other practitioners. So don't fall into the trap of, feeling uncomfortable, not getting better, all that sort of jazz like that. You have every right to look for another person.
I think that's a really beautiful message, and tapping into that intuition that we all have, and oftentimes women are better at tapping into that than us blokes, and knowing that our body, like you said, you call bullshit on people saying you can't get pregnant after having endometriosis, quite bad. Or, like, the body can heal. The body knows how to heal. It can heal these things. And if you're not being heard, or not feeling that you've been listened to, or feeling like what you've been told's incorrect, like, move on.
Absolutely. It goes in levels. You have to fulfill the psychology, feel safe with the person you're with. Once you feel safe, you have to be able to process your food. So we go down into the gut. And once you're processing your food and unlocking all the good nutrients and getting rid of any sort of bad bugs, then, once we get those nutrients, all the good stuff goes to the lower level. So it's kind of like the chakra systems. You know what I mean? You can't have one out of whack. You know what I mean? You've really got to try your best. And that's that self-work. And yeah, so I think for me, it's, I said, don't, seek those different opinions. Like, I can't express that enough. Like, the things that I've seen over my 9-year career cannot be, as much as I've tried, I've seen some of the most insane fertility stories, as far as being, told you have, no one ovary, your other ovary is lazy, fallopian tubes are all like scarred up, your uterus is scarred up, you have this, and then these people get pregnant. It does take a little bit of extra time, you know what I mean? So time is an essential thing. Patience is a virtue. But be very careful. It's kind of like psychics. Be careful of what you hear. Once you hear it, it's very hard to unhear it. Yeah. So that's my warning when people see practitioners or doctors that say, yeah, it's game over for your fertility. It's game over for your endometriosis. You're going to need a hysterectomy. Hysterectomy still doesn't cure it. It's a very complex pattern. And that's why I say to people, if you have, and this, this actually goes for any gynecological, complexity. And, so like I said, so my role as a women's health practitioner, which I absolutely love doing, because that's all I do is submerge myself into any book or research to get best outcomes, or to know when to refer, which is also fine, is for any female, not just endometriosis, PCOS, complex thyroid disorders, fibroids, PMDD, unexplained heavy flow is another one that I see a lot of, so just females, unfortunately, they can't go out when they've got their period. They're getting 8-day bleeds. They're bleeding through their pads, their super tampons. They're bleeding on their bed. They're bleeding onto, they've tried all these other methods. It's just like, again, don't become your diagnosis and don't accept just one opinion. Seek as many opinions until you feel like, number one, you're safe and you're comfortable with the person you're working with, and you feel like they're coming from an authentic place of helping you. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. It goes for any gynecological reason. If you feel like you're not being heard, you feel you're not getting the appropriate testing, it's the beauty of Instagram now, is that we can find people that have really good content that you can tell is authentic. You can tell it's probably written by them, or you can tell they have a passion for their niche. I'll never forget when I made the leap of faith. I'm like, well, when I categorize myself as a women's health practitioner, I'm chopping out 50% of the population. And it was scary, because you're like, well, that's 50%, and I'm like, but at the end of the day, the world will always reward those who chase their dreams and their passion. And strangely enough, mine was in the women's health sphere. And this is why I hear so many cool stories and I've seen so many supposed miracles that can't be explained by Western medicine, but people now have babies. People are in an endometriosis type remission. The impossible is always possible if you believe you can heal.
If you believe you can heal and if you want to heal.
Yeah.
Peter, this has been so good. Your passion is just glowing and resonating. I love it. I really love it. It's a pleasure to be able to connect with people like yourself who are so just into it and passionate. You know, we talk about doing things that we enjoy. Tyler Tolman says passion is the word pass ion, like we pass electricity when we're in our passion.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
Yeah, and even though we're going through a Zoom right now, I can feel it, and I'm sure everyone else listening can feel it. Your passion for this topic is amazing, and your depth of knowledge is incredible. So it's been so great to have a bit over an hour of your time. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
It's been awesome. So if people want to find out more about you, if people want to work with you or ask you some questions or just reach out, how can they do that?
The easiest way, as I suggested before, is probably Instagram. You'll find a lot of my content. So I do post a lot of my free content to help people to, give women ideas about endometriosis or, complex gynecological issues. And then from there, most females can then reach out to me either through Instagram or through my website, which is hmhb.com.au. And, I look forward to meeting, these women that need help or feel like they're not getting answers. And, I guess my promise to people listening is that I'm always going to come at them in the most authentic way. If I'm the one to help you, I'm going to tell you. And if I'm not going to be the one to help you, I'm going to tell you.
I love that. I bloody love that. It's so important in today's world. You're sharing an amazing message. And I'm just grateful for this conversation, mate. Thank you so much. I don't have endometriosis. However, I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's plenty of women out there who have learned something as well, and men too, right? It's important that us men support our women with what they're going through.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And I look forward to having you on again soon.
All right. Thank you, Alex.